So The Weeknd made a movie about himself, and it's now out in theaters for you to watch. It's called Hurry Up Tomorrow, and yeah, let's talk about it. But before we get into today's review, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on push notifications. But let's get into today's review. Hurry Up Tomorrow is a movie that stars The Weeknd himself in a movie about The Weeknd, and I saw it this last weekend, and let's just say that Abel wasn't able to make a good movie. So this movie is basically based on a real life experience that happened to The Weeknd, in which he lost his voice before a concert, which sort of lowered his self-esteem and self-image when it comes to performing, and that's loosely what this movie is based on. But then they throw a couple other characters into the movie with Jenna Ortega and Barry Keoghan to try and give us that, you know, visual representation as to how The Weeknd is fighting with his demons. An interesting idea, one that could have been, you know, more interesting in an actual movie than how it's done in this one. Now, the movie is directed by Trey Edward Schultz, who also directed a movie called Waves, which I think is an absolute underrated masterpiece, and I think his directing style and his filmmaking style is so I mean, in a sense, it's very visual. There's so much going on with his editing, with his directing, with the cinematography, the way that he works with his cinematographers. His style of filmmaking is so very interesting, and I was so excited to see that in this movie. And luckily, thank God, the movie, it doesn't fail to really be a really pretty thing to watch as far as what the movie actually looks like. But then you get to the writing, and then you start realizing that, oh yeah, this movie was written by like 5 people, The Weeknd being one of the writers, as well as Trey Edward Schultz. And it really makes me wonder, like, what went on in the writer's room when they were coming up with this movie's story, because there really isn't a story. It's The Weeknd having kind of like a meltdown because of him losing his voice. He's also, you know, fighting with recently having broken up with his girlfriend, because apparently he's kind of like this abusive person. And then we are introduced to Jenna Ortega's character, who becomes a love interest, and then it's sort of become this misery kind of movie in which she's keeping him held hostage so that he can revisit like his, you know, his most famous music possible, and then she like dances in front of him, and that's pretty much the whole movie. There's some pretty jarring moments in which we get to see the inside of The Weeknd's mind, where there is actually, you know what, I'll give this movie some credit, because there's one scene where he's trapped in his mind. I think it's after like getting knocked out by Jenna Ortega, and he's in his mind, and he's in this abandoned hotel. And then there's this woman, I assume is Jenna Ortega, but they are very like all disheveled and creepy, and they're kind of kneeled down, and a bunch of loud noises happened, and it's actually kind of scary. So I gave him props for that, because I didn't know this movie was going to be a horror movie. That I give some credit for, but everything else, this movie is such a self-obsessed movie that really just doesn't even understand itself. Now, yeah, you could make it an underlying meaning that like, oh, The Weeknd doesn't really understand himself either, but then I'm like, all right, shut up. I love The Weeknd. And whoever says like you're not a true Weeknd fan if you don't love this movie, that is just like the biggest crock of crap. I mean, just like, stop. I love The Weeknd. I love his music. Funny enough, like my first viral video on TikTok was actually breaking down his music video for Save Your Tears, because there's a lot of movie references. So I can tell that The Weeknd has that, you know, that he loves movies, he loves film, he loves the references, and he really loves being artsy, because I think The Weeknd's Save Your Tears music video is actually really good as far as directing goes. But, you know, you can't really do that within a 2-hour movie unless you have, you know, unless you actually give it substance and give it a story, because basically this could have just been a 10-minute, you know, music video, and even music videos aren't that long. It's just there was nothing happening in this movie. And a lot of people were dogging on The Weeknd for his performance. And, you know, as much as I also don't think that The Weeknd gives a good performance in this movie, I think in moments where he's not needing to be serious, he kind of just sounds and acts like himself. So that kind of saves him from having a terrible performance. But then there's scenes where he needs to be serious, and he really needs to, you know, show how angry he is. And he doesn't come off in a way that really sounds threatening or worried or scared, and it's kind of just distracting and takes away from the big, like, the main idea that they're trying to go for this movie. It's really distracting. So I don't blame people for dogging on him and saying that that's the worst part of the movie, because he really does not give that great of a performance. And I think that The Weeknd is a very, very, very talented person. And, I think that he is able... Sorry, I'm done with the jokes. I think he has the ability to make something truly special, which he has in music videos. But I think we should just keep it there. At the end of the day, the movie, it's really, and I try not to disrespect filmmaking at all, but at the end of the day, when I'm trying to be as honest as possible, this is almost not even a movie. The reason I say that is because there isn't a story. There's elements of a story. They try to give Jenna Ortega's character some background. They try to give her a reason to be doing the stuff that she's doing. But everything is just ignored. Everything is kind of just like, okay, so here's this. So you're supposed to interpret it this way. Like, so at the very beginning, when Jenna Ortega is burning down the house, that's actually supposed to be The Weeknd burning down, his reputation. That's what that's supposed to mean. But no, the movie just plays it off as, no, Jenna Ortega is doing something bad. Committing arson and, burning down a house. That's what's actually happening. We're not supposed to understand those underlined meanings. And that's what this whole movie is. It's doing something so that the audience is basically forced to be like, okay, this means that, or that means this other thing. Oh, this is connected to that. You can do that in a film, but you need to do it in a way that actually makes sense and becomes an interesting story so that we can actually take away stuff from it, so that we can understand what not to do when it comes to, what The Weeknd's doing. Because this movie is a bit self-absorbed, and, a lot of movies, people cast themselves as themselves, and they're also self-absorbed. But there's also, a story to their movies. And a good example is like Better Man that came out with Robbie Williams. That movie is honest. That movie is basically telling us that, yes, Robbie Williams was a piece of crap. Robbie Williams was an abuser. Robbie Williams did a lot of bad stuff. He was basically telling us that like, yeah, I was a shitty person. I did a lot of bad stuff. And really, you shouldn't forgive me for it, because I did a lot of bad stuff, and I'm owning up to it. I did a lot of bad stuff. But in this movie, it's basically just The Weeknd telling us, like, yeah, so I'm in a couple of binds. Like, I'm in a couple of, like, these bad situations. But just, like, I'm only human. Like, it's just like, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not the one in the wrong. That's what it felt like. Not saying that that's exactly what they were trying to do, but it just felt like, okay, focus on one thing. Focus on one reason why The Weeknd is having these insomnia attacks. Just focus on one thing. Just make it obvious that there's a lot going on, but focus the movie on something. Give us a reason to really attach ourselves to the story, rather than just throwing in a bunch of random crap throughout the entire nearly 2-hour runtime. Maybe I'm talking way too much. Maybe I sound just like this movie and saying a lot, but saying nothing. But yeah, this movie is just, it's not good. It's just not, it was just not something that I would ever recommend someone to watch. And just, it's a cool idea. I like how they made a movie, for an album. And if you're going to make it, if you're going to make it marketing for your album, that's fine, but make it interesting. Now, it reminded me, this is like all I could think of. It reminded me of like how, I don't know how old you are. I'm not even that old, but like in the early years, like early 2000s, going to McDonald's, they would like pass out VHSs of like Ronald McDonald movies that are exclusive, that you could only get at McDonald's. That's exactly what this movie felt like. It felt like a movie that should have just been handed out for free, because it's promoting what's really important, his music. But That's not what it is. They put a lot of money into this movie to make something that just wasn't that good. If you like this movie, that is great. I am so happy for people that can just like a movie. But at the end of the day, I didn't like this movie at all. I think this was very poor. I think it was just a very huge slog from start to finish, and I wouldn't even recommend anyone to go see it. But again, if you loved it, I respect that opinion. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on push notifications. But that brings you to the end of today's video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of it. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you in the next one. But remember, your movie moment is right around the corner. See you in the next video.